It was supposed to be just another coast-to-coast flight, Dallas to San Francisco, the kind I'd taken dozens of times before. Flight 2187 was already delayed by 2 hours due to thunderstorms rolling across the Midwest. The mounting tension was palpable in the cramped boarding area of Terminal C, where business travelers tapped furiously on laptops and families tried to keep restless children entertained. When boarding finally began, I settled into my aisle seat in row 12, observing my fellow passengers with casual interest. The cabin was filled with the usual mix: exhausted parents, stoic business people, and excited vacationers. A woman in row 5 caught my attention, mid-40s, professionally dressed, clearly distressed as she spoke with a flight attendant. Her voice carried just enough for me to catch fragments about a family emergency and needing to make a connection. "I understand your concern," the flight attendant said with practiced patience, "but we need to follow procedure for takeoff." The standoff might have ended there, but then Captain Mark Reynolds emerged from the cockpit. Tall and imposing in his Navy uniform with 4 gold stripes, he had the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades in the sky. At first, I was impressed by his presence. Here was a senior pilot taking time to address a passenger's concerns. Personally, that impression shattered in seconds. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying clearly down the aisle, "your connection isn't my problem. Neither is whatever family drama you've got going on." He gestured dismissively. "You're holding up 183 other passengers who also have places to be." The cabin fell silent. The woman's face flushed deep red as tears welled in her eyes. She wasn't causing a scene. She'd simply been asking a question. The disproportionate public humiliation was jarring. "Now, can you sit down so we can get this plane in the air, or do we need to find someone who will?" The captain's tone left no room for response as he turned and strode back to the cockpit, leaving the flight attendant looking mortified. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Around me, passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. The woman slowly sank into her seat, shoulders hunched, trying to make herself invisible. Something needed to be done, but what? We were all trapped in an aluminum tube, about to hurtle through the sky under this man's command. I glanced at my phone. Still time before takeoff procedures would require it to be switched to airplane mode. My finger hovered over the screen. I had a decision to make. What will happen when Alex decides to confront this situation? Will other passengers stand up against the captain's behavior? The continuation of this true story is in the next video. If you want to discover how an ordinary person can make a difference when witnessing an injustice, subscribe to the channel right now and hit the bell to be notified when Part 2 goes live. Leave in the comments what you would do in this situation. Would you speak up or remain silent? Your subscription helps us continue bringing real stories that make a difference. My heart raced as I pulled up the airline's customer service contact. This wasn't about being a Karen or causing trouble. It was about basic human dignity. I typed quickly, documenting what I'd witnessed while the details were fresh. The message sent just as the announcement came to prepare for takeoff. Beside me, a gray-haired man in a business suit leaned over. "You saw what happened up there?" he asked quietly. "Hard to miss," I replied, slipping my phone into airplane mode. "I fly this route every week. That's not the first time Reynolds has done something like this." He offered his hand. "Jim Kaplan?" "By the way, Alex Chen," I responded, shaking it. "Reynolds is known among frequent flyers. Great technical pilot, terrible with people." Jim's eyes darted toward the cockpit. "Been reported before, but nothing ever happens." The plane lurched forward, taxiing toward the runway. Through the window, gray clouds hung low over the airport. The cabin lights flickered momentarily, and I noticed the woman in row 5 flinch slightly at the turbulence. Her mascara had run, leaving faint dark streaks on her cheeks that she hadn't fully wiped away. "You know what bothers me most?" Jim continued, lowering his voice. "My daughter's about her age. If someone spoke to her that way. He trailed off, jaw tightening. As we reached cruising altitude, I observed a middle-aged woman across the aisle scrolling through something on her tablet. Recognizing the airline's logo on her screen, I realized she was filing a complaint about the incident. Our eyes met briefly, and she gave me a small nod of solidarity. "You're not the only one," she whispered, tilting her screen slightly. I recorded the last part of what he said. Throughout the flight, I noticed several passengers making their way to row 5, offering quiet words of support to the woman. A teenage girl handed her a packet of tissues. An elderly man stopped and shared what looked like a business card. Each small act of kindness was a silent rebuke to what had occurred. When the beverage service came around, I made my decision. I asked the flight attendant, Sophia, according to her name tag, if we could speak privately. "I want to file a formal witness statement about what happened during boarding," I told her in the galley area, the smell of coffee brewing adding to my heightened senses. "That wasn't right." Sophia glanced nervously over her shoulder before leaning closer. Her professional composure slipped momentarily, revealing genuine concern. "Between us, several of us have documented incidents with Captain Reynolds. 3 formal complaints just this month." She lowered her voice further. "Company keeps burying them because he's got connections in management and an impeccable safety record. So he just gets away with it?" The injustice made my stomach knot. Flight attendants who push too hard, get their schedules messed with, suddenly find themselves on problem routes. She hesitated, weighing her next words carefully. "But if enough passengers report independently—" "I've already sent one message," I said. "What else can I do?" She slipped me a business card with an email address handwritten on the back. "Customer Relations Supervisor, direct line. Her name is Vanessa Martinez. If you mention you spoke to me, use my employee number instead of my name." She tapped a sequence on the card. "Protection, you understand." The overhead speakers crackled, and Captain Reynolds' voice filled the cabin with a weather update. The same voice that had humiliated a passenger now described their flight path with professional detachment. The disconnect was jarring. Back at my seat, I noticed Jim watching me. "Doing something?" he asked. "Trying to." I showed him the card. He pulled out his phone and snapped a picture of it. "Count me in. And I've got about 30,000 followers on Twitter who might be interested in hearing about this too." "Social media?" I hesitated. I wasn't thinking of taking it that far. Sometimes that's the only language these companies understand. He sighed. "Look, I don't want to cost anyone their job unnecessarily, but this isn't Reynolds' first offense. Sometimes people need a wake-up call before they'll change." The remainder of the flight passed in a blur of turbulence and shared looks between passengers. I drafted a detailed email to Vanessa Martinez, carefully documenting times, exact wording, and the reactions of those around me. As we began our descent into San Francisco, the woman in row 5 briefly made eye contact with me. The resigned sadness in her expression cemented my resolve. The situation is intensifying. How will this story end? Will the airline actually take action against Captain Reynolds? And what happened to the woman in row 5? Don't miss the emotional conclusion in part 3. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to find out how one small action can create ripples that change lives forever. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. 2 weeks later, I was reviewing lab results in my office when an email notification appeared on my screen. The sender, Vanessa Martinez, VP of Customer Experience at the airline. The subject line made my heart skip. Flight 2187 incident documentation, request for call. My report, combined with statements from Jim, the woman with the tablet recording, and at least 7 other passengers, had finally broken through the bureaucratic barriers protecting Captain Reynolds. I scheduled the call for my lunch break, trying not to get my hopes up. "First, I want to thank you for your detailed account," Martinez began when we connected. Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd reviewed too many similar complaints. What you've provided, along with the other passenger statements, has given us a clear picture of a situation that shouldn't have happened. She explained that this incident had triggered a review of previously filed complaints against Reynolds, 17 in total over the past 18 months, most buried in various departments or dismissed with cursory investigations. Captain Reynolds is now on administrative leave pending a complete investigation, she continued. I want you to know we're taking this seriously. What about the woman? I asked. Row 5. Do you know if she's okay? There was a pause on the line. We've reached out to Ms. Elaine Woodward, the passenger in question, Martinez said, her voice softening. She was trying to reach her father in the hospital before... Another pause. She didn't make it in time. That detail hit me hard. What should have been a moment of compassion had instead become another trauma for someone already facing a personal tragedy. I thought about how the captain's words must have compounded her grief, the unnecessary cruelty of it all. Would it be possible? Could I send her a message somehow? I asked. I can't share her contact information, but I could forward something from you, Martinez offered. Would you like me to do that? 3 days later, I received a notification that Jim Kaplan had tagged me in a social media post. Airline industry news sites were reporting that Captain Reynolds had been removed from flight duty, pending an internal investigation into numerous passenger complaints regarding unprofessional conduct. Comments flooded in from other passengers, sharing similar experiences. One flight attendant, posting anonymously, thanked those who had spoken up. You've done what we couldn't without risking our jobs. A month later, a cream-colored envelope arrived at my office with the airline's logo embossed on the back. Inside was a handwritten note forwarded through the airline's customer relations department. Dear Alex, it began in elegant handwriting. My name is Elaine Woodward. I was the woman in row 5 on flight 2187. Ms. Martinez informed me that you were one of the passengers who reported the incident with Captain Reynolds. I wanted to thank you personally. Her words brought tears to my eyes. In that moment of humiliation, she wrote, I was already dealing with news that my father had suffered a stroke. I felt completely alone and powerless. Knowing someone noticed and cared enough to act means everything, even though we've never properly met. The note included her contact information with an invitation to call when I felt comfortable doing so. For days I carried her letter in my bag, rereading it during quiet moments, wondering about the woman who'd written it. When we finally connected by phone, her voice was warm and steady, nothing like the shattered person I'd seen on the plane. The airline executives contacted me personally, Elaine told me after we'd exchanged pleasantries, not just with an apology, but with news that Captain Reynolds would no longer be flying with the company. Was he fired? I asked, surprised at the decisive action. The official statement was that he opted for early retirement, she replied, but the investigation uncovered a pattern of similar behavior going back years. You helped protect countless future passengers who would have faced the same treatment. Our conversation flowed easily, lasting over an hour. We discovered we both worked in healthcare. She as a pediatric surgeon at Northwestern Memorial in Chicago, me in medical research in San Francisco. What began as a terrible encounter on a delayed flight had somehow formed a meaningful connection between strangers. I've been thinking about how many times I've witnessed something wrong and stayed silent, I admitted. It's easier not to get involved. That's what makes what you did matter, Elaine said. You had nothing to gain. We talked about her father, how she'd missed saying goodbye to him by just 3 hours, about the added anguish of sitting on that tarmac knowing each minute delayed was precious time lost, about the small kindnesses from other passengers that had kept her from completely breaking down. Sometimes, Elaine reflected before we ended our call, you don't know the impact of standing up for someone until much later. My father always taught me that character is what you do when no one important is watching, but maybe everyone is important. 2 months later, I flew to Chicago for a medical conference. Elaine and I met for dinner at a small Italian restaurant near Lake Michigan. The spring air was crisp, carrying the promise of summer across the water. As we shared a meal and our stories, I couldn't help but reflect on the strange paths that bring people together. Before we parted, she showed me something. On her phone, a new airline policy regarding passenger dignity and staff conduct that had been implemented following the investigation. At the bottom of the press release was a quote. "This policy change came about through the courage of our passengers and staff who refused to normalize unprofessional behavior." As I hung up, I thought about how easy it would have been to stay, silent, to mind my own business on that flight. One small action had rippled outward in ways I couldn't have anticipated. In a world where we often feel powerless against institutional indifference, it was a reminder that speaking up still matters. That sometimes the most important journeys start with simply refusing to look away.